What an alien told me about Judgment Day shattered everything I believed about God. In the fall of 2018, a being from another world descended into the Tennessee woods and revealed to a broken ex-cop that the final judgment isn't what the church has been teaching for 2,000 years. What this extraterrestrial showed Thomas Greer about heaven, hell, and the true nature of divine judgment will obliterate everything you think you know about salvation. I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about a vibrational truth that's been buried beneath centuries of fear and control. This alien being explained that judgment isn't a courtroom in the sky, it's a frequency shift in your own consciousness. And once you see how this really works, there's no going back to comfortable Sunday sermons. This knowledge will set you free, but it might cost you your illusions about who God really is. If you're ready to face a truth that church leaders have kept hidden since the beginning, subscribe and activate the bell. Because what happened to Thomas that stormy night will change how you see your own soul forever. Now, let me tell you how a desperate prayer in the dark brought something impossible down from the stars. Thomas Greer was 56 years old, ex-cop, divorced, living alone in the Tennessee hills where the wind never stopped talking to the trees. The cabin creaked under October rain, wood and rust, isolation and regret. He'd chosen this place because nobody asked questions here. Nobody knocked on doors. Nobody cared what kept a man awake at 3 a.m. with a half-empty bottle and eyes that didn't close right anymore. The wind scratched at the windows tonight. Sharp, persistent, like it wanted in. Thomas sat in the same chair he'd sat in for 3 years. The leather was cracked. The springs complained. But it was his spot, his confessional booth made of silence and whiskey. On the table beside him, the pocket watch sat frozen. 11:47. It had stopped the night everything stopped. The night his hand pulled a trigger and a kid's life ended on a dark street in Nashville. Wrong place, wrong person, wrong everything. He hadn't wound the watch since. Couldn't. Time didn't deserve to move forward when a 22-year-old was buried 6 feet under Tennessee clay because Thomas Greer made a mistake. The smell of wet wood filled the cabin. Rain mixed with earth. It was the same smell from that night. The same dampness that clung to his uniform as he knelt beside the body and realized what he'd done. Realized that no amount of protocol or procedure or sorry could bring the kid back. The guilt sat in his chest like a stone. Heavy. Constant. Sometimes he forgot it was there. Then he'd breathe deep and feel it again. Sharp. Real. Unforgiving. He picked up the glass. The whiskey burned going down. It always did. But the burn was better than the quiet. Better than the voice in his head that whispered the same thing every night. You're going to hell for this. Thomas believed it. Believed it with the same certainty he'd once believed in justice and right and wrong. He'd been a cop for 30 years. He knew how judgment worked. You do wrong, you pay. Simple as that. And he'd done wrong. The worst kind. The nights were long in these hills. Longer than they should be. Like time stretched itself just to make him suffer more. He'd pray sometimes. Old Catholic prayers his mother taught him. Hail Marys and Our Fathers whispered into the dark. But the prayers never went anywhere. They just hung in the air like smoke. Like God had stopped listening the moment Thomas pulled that trigger. Maybe he had. Maybe judgment had already started. And this cabin was just the waiting room before hell opened its doors and called his name. Thomas drained the glass, reached for the bottle. Another night. Another prayer that wouldn't be answered. Another round of guilt served neat with no chaser. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills, deep and low, the kind that made your chest vibrate. Thomas barely noticed anymore. Thunder was just noise, background static to the louder storm in his head. But then the dogs started. The Hendersons had 3 hounds 2 miles down the ridge. Big animals. Hunting dogs with voices that carried. Thomas heard them sometimes when they caught scent of deer or coyote. But this was different. This wasn't excitement. This was fear. The howling rose and fell in waves. Desperate. Frantic. Like something had them cornered. Thomas stood, walked to the window, pressed his palm against the cold glass. The forest was dark, trees swaying in wind and rain. Nothing unusual. But the dogs wouldn't stop, and then he felt it. That thing cops develop after years on the job. That sixth sense that says something's wrong before your brain can explain why. The hair on his arm stood up. His pulse quickened. Not from fear exactly. From recognition. Like his body knew something was coming before his mind could catch up. Thomas turned from the window, looked at the frozen watch. 11:47. Always 11:47. Time suspended. Guilt suspended. Life suspended in a moment that never ended. But tonight something felt different. Tonight the air itself felt charged, like the universe was holding its breath, like the waiting was finally over. He didn't know what was coming, didn't know if it was judgment or redemption or just another storm. But he felt it approaching, felt it in his bones, in the electric tension of the air, in the way the dogs howled like the world was ending. Thomas Greer had spent 3 years waiting for God to damn him. 3 years of whiskey confessions and frozen time and guilt that wouldn't let go. That night in the Tennessee hills, with rain hammering the roof and thunder shaking the walls and dogs screaming warnings into the dark, Thomas felt destiny arrive, and he understood with sudden clarity that tonight, everything would change. Tonight, regret and fate would finally touch. Tonight, the judgment he'd been dreading would come, but not the way he expected, not even close. The storm grew, not gradually, suddenly, like nature decided to stop holding back. Thunder cracked so loud Thomas felt it in his teeth. The cabin shook. Rain turned horizontal, hammering the walls like fists demanding entry. But it was the lightning that made him move. Red lightning, gold lightning, colors that didn't belong in a Tennessee storm. Thomas grabbed his jacket, pulled on boots, reached for the rifle by the door. Old habits, cop habits. When something's wrong, you investigate. When something's dangerous, you go armed. He stepped onto the porch. Rain hit his face immediately. Cold, sharp. The wind tried to push him back inside, but he moved forward anyway. Down the steps, into the muddy yard. The dogs had gone silent. That was worse somehow. Silence after that kind of howling meant one of two things. Whatever scared them had left, or it had gotten close enough that noise didn't matter anymore. Thomas looked toward the forest. Trees bent and twisted in the wind. Everything normal, everything wrong. Then he saw it, high above the tree line, a light descending in a spiral pattern, slow, controlled, silent. His first thought, military helicopter, lost, trying to land in bad weather, but helicopters made noise, lots of noise, rotors cutting air, engines straining. This made no sound at all. It just descended, graceful, deliberate, like something falling upward. The light pulsed, red, gold, red, gold. Colors that shouldn't exist together but did. Colors that made his eyes water if he looked too long. Thomas raised the rifle, not to shoot, just to feel something solid in his hands. Something real. Something that made sense when nothing else did. The air changed. That's the only way he could describe it later. The air itself shifted, became thicker, heavier, like breathing underwater without the drowning. The sound of rain disappeared, just stopped, mid-pour, like someone hit mute on the universe. Thomas could see rain still falling, could see it hitting the ground, but heard nothing. Absolute silence wrapped around him like a blanket made of absence. The light descended lower, closer, through the canopy of trees into the clearing 200 yards from his cabin. The same clearing where he'd buried his dog 5 years ago. The same clearing where he'd sat drunk on Christmas Eve and begged God to just end it. A flash lit the forest, crimson and gold exploding together. The trees threw shadows that moved wrong, shadows that bent backward, shadows that seemed alive. Thomas felt his legs moving before his brain gave permission, walking toward the light, toward the impossible. The rifle hung loose in his grip. His heart hammered, but his feet kept moving. Fear and curiosity fought in his chest. Fear said run. Curiosity said look. And underneath both was something else. Something that felt like recognition. Like his soul knew something his mind hadn't caught up to yet. He reached the tree line, pushed through wet branches. The light grew brighter with each step, warmer. Not heat exactly. Something else. Something that touched skin and went deeper. The clearing opened before him, and Thomas stopped breathing. The light had landed, not crashed. Landed, gently, creating a perfect circle in the center of the clearing. Steam rose from wet earth turned dry. Rain fell everywhere except inside that circle. Like reality bent around it. Like physics took a night off. Thomas raised the rifle, pointed it at nothing, at everything. His hands shook, but his eyes stayed locked on the light. It pulsed, rhythmic, like a heartbeat made of color and warmth, and something that felt older than mountains. Then the voice came, not through his ears, through his mind. Clear, calm, undeniable. "Don't be afraid." Thomas's finger found the trigger. Didn't pull, just rested there, ready, waiting. "I've come to speak about the judgment you fear." His heart stopped, actually stopped. For one full second his chest went still and his blood forgot to move and time suspended itself again like that broken watch on his table. Because nobody knew. Nobody knew about the guilt, the fear, the certainty that hell waited with his name already carved on a cell door. Nobody knew except God, and whatever this was. Whatever stood in that circle of impossible light knew exactly what kept Thomas Greer awake every night. With whiskey and regret, the fear drained out of him. Not because the situation wasn't terrifying, it absolutely was, but fear suddenly seemed pointless, like showing up afraid to a meeting that had been scheduled since before he was born. This wasn't random. This wasn't chance. This was meant, ordained, written in whatever book decides when destiny comes knocking. His pulse hammered now, not from threat, from recognition, deep recognition, soul-level recognition. Like meeting someone you've known in dreams but never seen awake. The light dimmed slightly. Shapes moved inside it. Shadows, figures, something preparing to emerge. Thomas lowered the rifle, let it hang at his side. His mouth opened but no words came. What do you say when the impossible lands in your backyard and knows your deepest shame? The steam swirled. The light pulsed. The voice echoed in his mind one more time. What you fear isn't real. But what I'll show you is. And for the second time in 3 years, time stopped moving. But this time it wasn't guilt that froze the moment. It was possibility. It was the sense that everything he'd believed about judgment and God and hell and redemption was about to shatter. And maybe, just maybe, be rebuilt into something that actually made sense. The figure stepped through the light. Tall, 7 feet, maybe 8. Blue skin that glowed like moonlight trapped under flesh. Thomas's legs almost gave out. He locked his knees, held the rifle even though he knew it was useless. But it was the eyes that stopped his breath. White fire, flames made of light burning where pupils should be. They didn't hurt to look at. Somehow they didn't hurt at all. The being stood at the edge of the light circle, watching, waiting. Around it floated a golden sphere, translucent, perfectly smooth, about the size of a basketball but flawless. No seams, no markings. The sphere hummed. Thomas felt it more than heard it, a vibration that started in his chest and spread outward, into his bones, into his blood. It was harmony, musical harmony made solid. His body grew heavy, not tired, heavy, like gravity doubled. His knees bent, his shoulders sagged. The rifle slipped from his grip and hit the mud with a soft thud. Thomas wanted to pick it up, couldn't. His arms wouldn't respond. Not paralyzed, just waited, like the earth itself was pulling him down. The being took a step forward, slow, careful, and Thomas saw something in those burning eyes that made no sense. Compassion, deep, profound, almost human. The voice returned, inside his mind, clear as his own thoughts but distinctly other. "Do you believe God has condemned you?" The question hit like a physical blow. Thomas opened his mouth, tried to speak. Tried to say yes, obviously yes. I killed an innocent kid and God doesn't forgive that. But the words died, stuck in his throat, turned to ash before they could become sound. The golden sphere pulsed, once, twice, growing brighter, and then Thomas's life started playing on its surface. Not like a movie, like memory made visible. He saw himself at 6 years old, learning to ride a bike, his father running beside him, pride in his dad's voice. Flash, teenager, first kiss behind the gym. Jenny Martinez, tasting like cherry chapstick and possibility. Flash, police academy, graduation, his mother crying happy tears. Flash, his wedding, Sarah in white, promising forever, both of them meaning it. Each memory came with feeling, not remembered feeling, actual feeling. The joy, the hope, the love, all of it flooding through him again. Then darker memories, the divorce, the drinking, the cases that went wrong, and finally, the shooting, the mistake, the moment everything ended. He saw the kid's face, saw the terror, saw the exact second life left those young eyes, felt his own horror crash over him like a wave made of knives. The shame hit fresh, raw, like it just happened. Thomas fell to his knees, couldn't stand anymore. Tears came, hot, fast, unstoppable. The being moved closer. The sphere followed, that golden light washing over Thomas like warm water. "Nothing will be hidden," the voice said, gentle, firm, "but nothing needs to be punished." Thomas looked up, tears blurring his vision, white fire eyes meeting his. "I killed him," Thomas whispered, finally finding words. "I killed an innocent kid. How is that not punishment worthy?" The being knelt, bringing those burning eyes level with Thomas's, close enough that Thomas could feel heat radiating from that blue skin. "You've been punishing yourself for 3 years. You've been judge, jury, and executioner of your own soul. You've sentenced yourself to hell and served it every single night." Thomas shook his head. You deserve what every soul deserves. To be seen completely, to be known fully, and to be loved anyway. The words cracked something inside him, some wall he'd built, some defense he'd maintained. It cracked and warm light poured through. The sphere pulsed again, brighter. The humming grew louder, that harmony wrapping around Thomas like arms, like comfort made of frequency and light. He felt his body start to shake, not from cold, not from fear, from something releasing, some tension he'd held so long he forgot it was there. "What are you?" Thomas asked, voice breaking. "What is this?" The being placed one long-fingered hand on Thomas's shoulder. The touch was warm, real, solid. "I am what your world calls visitor, what some call angel, what others call alien. The name doesn't matter. I came because you called, because your pain echoed loud enough to reach across dimensions." "Then what is judgment?" Thomas barely got the question out. The being's eyes blazed brighter. The sphere expanded, growing, filling the clearing with golden light. "Let me show you." The forest began to change. Trees became mirrors. Sky became ceiling. Reality folded itself into something new. The judgment was about to begin, but not from God's throne, from somewhere much closer, from his own soul finally ready to face itself completely. The forest transformed. Instantly, trees bent inward, becoming walls of light. Branches wove together overhead. The ground smoothed beneath Thomas's knees, wet earth becoming something like glass, reflective, showing his own face staring back. He was still in the clearing, but the clearing had become something else, a space between spaces. Thomas stood. The weight had lifted. The being remained beside him, silent, that golden sphere floating between them, still humming. Then the mirrors started showing things, every surface, pieces of his life reflecting back in fragments, truth scattered across 1,000 reflective surfaces. His first arrest, pride swelling as he cuffed a dealer terrorizing the neighborhood. Justice, real justice. Holding Sarah's hand in the hospital, her sister dying of cancer, sitting vigil for 48 hours, because that's what love looks like. Reading to third graders on his day off, kids who needed to see that cops were human. Good moments, kind moments, moments where Thomas Greer was exactly who he'd wanted to be. But then darker truths, the times he lost his temper, the arrest that got too rough, the domestic call where he chose not to see bruises because paperwork was a hassle. Small failures, human failures. Thomas watched them all. The mirrors held him captive. Then the final mirror appeared, larger than the rest, directly in front of him. The shooting, frame by frame, moment by moment. The alley, dark, rain-slicked. The figure, the hand moving. The gun raised, his gun, his hand, his decision, his mistake. The shot, the fall, the phone clattering. Not a weapon, never a weapon. Thomas saw the kid's face, saw the terror freeze, saw life become death. Tears poured down his face. 3 years of held grief finally breaking free. "This is what you fear," the being said. "This is the judgment you've been running from." Thomas nodded, couldn't speak. But watch closer. The mirror shifted, showed after. Thomas performing CPR even though he knew it was too late. Riding in the ambulance. Sitting outside the kid's house at 2 a.m., quitting the force, moving to these hills, punishing himself daily. You think judgment is about condemnation, about a scale where wrong tips toward hell. But that's not how this works. The mirrors multiplied. showing every person Thomas ever helped, every kindness, every moment of courage. There are no judges here, no court, no sentence, only consciousness expanding itself into light, only truth revealing itself. Thomas felt something shift in his chest, the stone of guilt. It started to crack, light seeping through. "I killed him," Thomas said. "I killed him and I can't undo it." "No, you can't. Death is real. Consequence is real. But punishment isn't what you think." The being moved closer, placed both hands on Thomas's shoulders. "The pain you feel, that's not God's judgment. That's compassion. That's your heart breaking because a life was lost. That's love trapped under the weight of mistake." Thomas shook his head. "How can it be love? You made a terrible mistake. A young life ended. That's tragedy. But the weight you're carrying, that's your soul trying to tell you something." "What?" "That you care. That you love that kid you never met. That his death matters. That's not evil, Thomas. Evil doesn't feel guilt. Evil shrugs and moves on." The crack widened. More light poured through, warm, healing. The mirror showing the shooting began to change. The image didn't vanish, but around it other images formed. The kid's mother, not just angry, grieving, but also eventually forgiving. Not forgetting, but choosing not to let hate consume her. Hell isn't punishment, Thomas. Hell is the absence of love, the refusal of it. But you never turned away. You broke, you isolated. But underneath all that pain, love was still there, hurting, but alive. Thomas looked at his reflection, saw his own face, older, tired, marked by grief and guilt. But for the first time, he didn't hate what he saw. "Light doesn't condemn," the being said softly. "Light only reveals what's real. You made a terrible mistake. You caused harm, and you've been trying to love your way through the pain ever since. That's not damnation. That's redemption already in progress." Thomas closed his eyes. Tears still falling, but different now. Released tears. Years of pressure finding exit. When he opened his eyes, the mirrors still showed his life. Still showed the shooting. Still showed every failure. But now he could see them without drowning. The being smiled. "Now you're ready to see what judgment really is." The being extended its hand. Long fingers. Blue skin glowing softly. A spark jumped from fingertip to Thomas's forehead. Not painful. Electric. Alive. Thomas's vision exploded outward. Suddenly he wasn't in the clearing anymore. He was above it. Above the forest. Above Tennessee. Above the entire planet spinning slow and beautiful in darkness. But the earth wasn't dark. It was covered in light. Threads of luminous energy crisscrossing the surface like veins. Currents of color flowing between cities, across oceans, through mountains, and everywhere. Souls. Billions of them. Each one a point of light. Each one burning with its own frequency, its own color, its own song. Thomas saw them all at once, felt them all at once. The magnitude of human consciousness laid bare like a map written in fire. Some souls burned red, anger, rage consuming everything. Some glowed sickly yellow, fear, constant, gnawing. Others pulsed gray, depression, numbness, the slow death of feeling. But there were brighter colors too. Souls that blazed blue with determination, green with healing, white with clarity, and some burned pure golden. Love, unconditional, the rarest color of all. Thomas felt tears on his face. How could you see all of humanity and not weep? The being's voice filled his mind. This is the final judgment. What your prophets spoke about. What your scriptures tried to describe. But words always fail the truth. Thomas watched the currents flow, watched souls connect and separate, watched light pass between people like messages written in color. The judgment isn't a courtroom in the sky. Isn't God sitting on a throne deciding who burns and who flies? It's this. Humanity finally seeing itself clearly, without filters, without lies. The vision shifted, pulled closer. Individual people now. A woman in Tokyo, her soul dim with loneliness. A child in Brazil laughing, his light pure. A man in Moscow drinking himself numb, his colors fading to ash. Heaven doesn't open gates, it opens consciousness. Hell doesn't drag souls down. Souls create their own hell by refusing to see what's real. Thomas understood, not intellectually, deeper, in his bones, in his blood. The end of the world wasn't destruction. It was revelation, the veil dropping, every human forced to look in the mirror. What you call the end times is just transition, from ignorance to awareness, from fear to love, from sleeping to waking. The vision changed again, and Thomas saw him, Jesus, but not the pale figure from church paintings, not the suffering man on a cross. This was energy, pure, living, vibrating at a frequency so high Thomas could barely perceive it. Christ consciousness, not a person, not a body, a state of being, a level of love so complete it transformed everything it touched. The light was gold, brighter than the sun but somehow gentle, warm, welcoming. The light of Christ isn't religion, isn't doctrine, it's the code, the frequency, the pattern that wakes up sleeping hearts. Thomas felt that light moving toward him, through him, around him, and he realized something that shattered everything he'd been taught. The being beside him, this visitor from impossible distances, the presence of Christ flowing through the clearing. They weren't separate, weren't different, they were the same, the exact same frequency, just wearing different forms, speaking different languages. There are no aliens and angels, no us and them, no heaven separate from earth. There's only consciousness, only love expressing itself in infinite forms. Thomas watched the two presences merge, the being's blue glow and Christ's golden light swirling together, dancing, becoming one unified field of compassion. He saw it clearly now. Jesus hadn't come from God's kingdom above the clouds. He'd come from the same place this being came from consciousness evolved beyond separation. Every master, every prophet, every being that tried to wake humanity up, they all came from the same source. All spoke the same truth in different words. Buddha, Muhammad, Moses, Mary, countless others whose names were lost but whose light still burned, all of them pointing to this moment, this awakening, this recognition that divinity wasn't out there. It was in here, in every heart, waiting. Thomas felt his own light change, felt it brighten, shift from dull gray to something warmer, something that looked almost like hope. The being's hand remained on his forehead, that spark still connecting them. You are not separate from this. You are part of the field, part of the light, part of the infinite compassion that holds all things. Thomas wanted to argue, wanted to say he was broken, disqualified from anything divine, but he couldn't, because he could see his own soul now, could see it burning there among billions. Even dimmed by guilt, his light had never gone out. It was still there, still burning, still trying to love its way through darkness. The vision began to fade, the earth shrinking, the souls dimming, the currents dissolving. But the knowing remained, the understanding, the direct experience of truth that couldn't be forgotten. Thomas stood in the clearing again, the being beside him, the golden sphere floating, the forest restored, but nothing was the same, because he'd seen it, seen what judgment really was, seen what was coming, and somewhere in his chest, that stone of guilt cracked a little more, light pouring through, warming places frozen for years. He looked at the being, looked into those white fire eyes, and for the first time since that kid died, Thomas Greer felt something that wasn't pain. He felt ready. The being stepped back. The golden sphere pulsed, that perfect harmony filling the air. Thomas's breathing had changed, slower, deeper, like his lungs remembered how to work properly. The voice came again, clear, patient. Every soul judges itself by its own vibration. That's the law. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked. Thomas listened, really listened, absorbing the words into places where belief lived. When consciousness wakes up, when the veil drops, when you finally see yourself clearly, everything false collapses. Every lie you told yourself, every mask you wore, it all falls away. The mirrors in the clearing flickered, still showing his life, but softer now, less accusing. That's the judgment people fear, not God's anger, their own truth, the moment they have to look at what they've actually become. Thomas felt the question forming. So nobody gets condemned? Nobody goes to hell? The being tilted its head. Those burning eyes studied him with something like sadness. Only by their own refusal to love, only by their own choice to stay in darkness even when light is offered, only by turning away from truth when truth stands right in front of them. Thunder rolled overhead, distant, the storm moving on. Hell isn't a place, isn't fire and torture and demons. Hell is this: seeing the truth about yourself and being unable to accept it, being unable to forgive yourself, being unable to let love in. Thomas thought about his cabin, his whiskey, his 3 years of self-imposed exile, his nightly ritual of guilt and shame. That had been hell, self-created, self-maintained, a prison with no walls except the ones he built. And heaven? He asked, voice rough. Heaven is the opposite. It's the peace of someone who looks at their whole life, the good and the bad, and accepts it all, embraces it all, loves themselves anyway. The being moved closer, placed that hand over Thomas's heart. Heaven is serenity, is wholeness, is finally being okay with who you are, not who you pretend to be, who you actually are. Thomas felt warmth spreading from that touch, through his chest, into his arms and legs, like ice melting after long winter. Jesus didn't come to punish anyone. That's not why he came. That's not why any of us come. Then why? Thomas whispered. To teach you how to cross the mirror, how to look at yourself without flinching, how to see your darkness and your light and accept both as part of the same beautiful, broken human experience. The golden sphere descended, hovered between them. Its surface showed images: Jesus teaching, Jesus healing, Jesus looking at people with compassion that sees everything and judges nothing. He came to show that love isn't weakness. Love is power, real power, the only power that actually changes anything. Thomas watched the images shift, saw Jesus with prostitutes and tax collectors, everyone the religious leaders said was unclean, saw him choosing the broken ones, the failed ones, the lost ones. The apocalypse your prophets wrote about. It's not destruction, it's unveiling. That's what the word means. The soul stripped of all pretense and seen completely. The being's voice grew softer, more intimate. That terrifies people, because most people spend their whole lives hiding, even from themselves. And the idea of being fully known, fully seen, that's scarier than any hell they can imagine. Thomas nodded. He understood, had lived that, had built his isolation around the fear of being seen. But here's what they miss. Being fully known is also being fully loved. The two go together. You can't have one without the other. The warmth in Thomas's chest grew stronger, reaching places cold so long he'd forgotten they existed. God isn't waiting to condemn you. God is waiting for you to stop condemning yourself, waiting for you to finally accept the love that's been there the whole time. Thomas felt something break, not the crack from before, something deeper, the final wall, the core belief that he was too damaged to deserve grace. It shattered, and what rushed in felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. His body began to vibrate, not shaking, vibrating, like every cell waking up, like his physical form finally matching the frequency his soul had been trying to reach. This is what's coming, this awakening, this recognition, when humanity stops judging and starts loving, stops fearing and starts accepting, stops hiding and starts healing. The fear of death that had lived in Thomas since childhood started dissolving, not disappearing, transforming, not fear of ending, desire for beginning, not terror of judgment, hunger for truth, not dread of hell, hope for wholeness. Death isn't the enemy, ignorance is. Death just moves you to the next room, but living your whole life asleep, that's the real tragedy. Thomas looked at his hands. They were glowing, faintly, golden, like he'd become part of the field. What do I do? He asked. What do I do with this? The being smiled. You live it. You become it. You let the love that broke you open transform into love that holds you together. And when people ask what happened, you don't preach. You just shine and let them wonder why. Thomas blinked. The clearing returned to focus. Trees, mud, rain falling softer now. The being stood beside him, the golden sphere floating. Everything as it had been, except for one thing, the watch in his pocket, the one that had stopped 3 years ago at 11:47. It was ticking. Thomas felt it before he heard it. A pulse against his chest, rhythmic, steady, alive. He reached into his pocket with trembling fingers, pulled out the old pocket watch, opened the brass case. The second hand moved. Tick, tick, tick. Each movement precise, deliberate. But it wasn't just ticking. It was synchronized, with the golden sphere, with its pulsing light. with that perfect harmony filling the clearing. Tick, pulse, like a heartbeat. Time is only a mirror of consciousness, the being said. It moves when you move, stops when you stop, flows when you're ready to flow. Thomas watched the second hand circle. Once, twice. The minute hand shifted. 11:48. Then 11:49. Time was moving forward. After 3 years of suspension, after 3 years of being stuck in that one terrible moment, forward, actually forward. He felt something shift in his chest, not the crack from before. Something else, something that felt like release, forgiveness. That's what it was, not given from outside, rising from within. The watch ticked on. 11:50, 11:51, and with each minute, Thomas felt lighter, like chains were falling away, like weights he'd carried so long were dissolving into air. He thought about the kid, the one he killed, the face that haunted every dream. And for the first time, he saw something different. Not the terror, not the moment of death. A smile. The kid was smiling. Young, alive. Before that night, before everything went wrong, Thomas saw him laughing with friends, saw him helping his mother, saw him playing with his little sister, saw a whole life that existed before Thomas ended it. And somehow, seeing that beauty hurt less than seeing the death. Somehow, remembering the kid as human instead of victim felt like honoring him. The past doesn't have to be a prison, the being said softly. It can be a teacher, a lesson, a stepping stone to something better. The watch kept ticking. 11:52, 11:53. Thomas felt tears on his face. Different tears. Not shame tears, release tears, healing tears. The kind that wash things clean. Something inside him snapped, not broke. Snapped, like chains under pressure, like ropes pulled too tight finally giving way. The guilt, the crushing weight that had lived in his chest for 3 years. It cracked. He felt it break apart with an internal sound like ice splitting in spring. And underneath, something else had been waiting, something he'd forgotten existed. Compassion, for himself, for the kid, for everyone involved in that terrible night. You thought you were lost, the being said, but you were only sleeping. Only dreaming nightmares when you could have been dreaming something better. The golden light from the sphere intensified, grew brighter, warmer, filling the clearing like liquid sunshine. Thomas closed his eyes, felt that light wash over him, through him, into places that had been dark so long. When he opened his eyes, everything looked different, sharper, clearer, more real. The trees weren't just trees. They were alive, breathing. The rain wasn't just water. It was cleansing, baptism happening every second. The being smiled. This is what forgiveness feels like. Not forgetting, not pretending it didn't happen, but choosing to carry the lesson instead of the punishment. Thomas looked down at the watch. The hands moved steadily. 11:54, 11:55, getting closer to something. The light grew brighter. The sphere descended lower. That harmony wrapping around everything. 11:56. 11:57. Thomas's breathing matched the rhythm, his heartbeat synchronized with the ticking, his entire being falling into alignment with something larger. 11:58. 11:59. The being placed both hands on Thomas's shoulders, those white fire eyes blazing. Watch. The second hand approached to 12. Closer, closer. The light intensified. The clearing held its breath. And then, 12. Midnight. The end of one day, the beginning of another. But the watch didn't show midnight. It showed 11:11. Both hands pointing up, parallel, aligned. The symbol, the code, the number people saw everywhere and wondered what it meant. Thomas understood suddenly. It meant this: alignment, awakening. The moment when everything inside finally matches everything outside. Time doesn't just move forward, the being said. Sometimes it returns. Sometimes it gives you another chance, another opportunity to choose differently. The watch glowed, actually glowed, golden light emanating from its face, and Thomas felt time start flowing again, really flowing, not dragging, not suspended, moving the way it's supposed to. The being released his shoulders, stepped back. You are not who you were. You are not defined by your worst moment. You are what you choose to become from this point forward. Thomas closed the watch, felt its warmth through the brass case, felt its steady pulse. He was ready, ready to move, ready to change, ready to finally stop living in that frozen moment and start living in all the moments yet to come. The past was still there, would always be there, but it wasn't a prison anymore. It was a teacher, and he was finally ready to learn. The being raised one hand, the air shimmered, and suddenly Thomas was seeing more than the clearing. The world opened before him, not physically, visually, like vision that could see across distances, across continents, across the entire planet at once. Cities appeared in his mind: New York, London, Tokyo, Mumbai. Millions of people moving through their lives, working, loving, fighting, praying. He saw wars, soldiers in deserts, bombs falling, children crying. He saw hospitals, doctors fighting to save lives, families holding vigil, death and birth happening simultaneously. He saw churches, mosques, temples, people on their knees begging God for help, for mercy, for meaning. So much pain, so much fear, so much confusion, but also moments of light. A father holding his newborn, a teacher staying late to help a struggling student, a stranger giving their coat to someone sleeping in the cold. Small acts, quiet acts, acts of love nobody would ever know about except the people involved. This, the being said, is what you call the end times. But look closer. Look at what's really happening. The vision shifted. Thomas saw the energy currents again, those threads of light connecting souls, but they were changing, moving, flowing in new patterns. What you call the end is only vibrational harvest. Every soul is being called to choose, fear or love, darkness or light. The choice has always been there, but now it's becoming impossible to ignore. Thomas watched people making decisions, small decisions, daily decisions, whether to help or walk past, whether to speak truth or stay silent. And with each choice, their light changed, grew brighter or dimmer, shifted color, moved frequency. The judgment doesn't come from outside. It comes from within, from each choice, each thought, each action. The being's voice grew stronger. Earth is waking up. The planet itself is shifting frequency, and every heart is being called to become a mirror, to reflect the whole, to stop pretending separation is real. Thomas saw it. Waves of energy rolling across continents, starting small, building, growing. Some people felt it and opened, let the light in, changed, transformed, became more loving, more conscious, more awake. Others felt it and closed, resisted, fought, clung harder to fear and anger, built thicker walls. The same energy, the same light, but different responses, different choices. That's the judgment. That's the separation your prophets talked about. Not God dividing people, people dividing themselves by how they respond to love. The vision zoomed closer. Thomas saw children being born, babies coming into the world with eyes that looked different, clearer, more aware. The new generation arrives remembering, carrying codes that previous generations lost. They're here to remind you what you forgot, what love actually is, what consciousness can do. He saw a little girl in Kenya touching a sick plant and watching it bloom. A boy in Canada knowing his mother was sad, even though she smiled. A teenager in Australia painting images that looked like other dimensions. Children, young souls, old souls, coming in hot, coming in clear. Jesus doesn't return in one body, the being said. That was never the plan. He returns through every consciousness that chooses to embody what he taught. Through everyone who finally understands that love isn't metaphor. It's technology. It's power. It's the actual operating system of reality. Thomas felt his chest expand, like his heart grew 3 sizes. You think the second coming is about one man descending from clouds, but it's about Christ consciousness rising in millions of hearts. It's about ordinary people becoming extraordinary by choosing love when everything around them chooses fear. The vision widened. Thomas saw it all at once. The whole planet, all 8 billion souls, all choosing, all deciding, all moving toward their own judgment that had nothing to do with external punishment and everything to do with internal alignment. This is the birth, the being said softly, not the end. Birth is painful. Birth is messy. Birth looks like death before it looks like life. But what's being born is a new earth, A new humanity, a new way of being human. Thomas watched the waves of light intensify, watched consciousness shift, watched the old world and the new world existing simultaneously. "You're a witness," the being said. "That's your role now. Not to save everyone, not to convince everyone, just to witness, to testify, to be living proof that judgment isn't condemnation, it's clarification." Thomas understood. Finally, completely. The judgment wasn't something to fear, it was something to embrace. It was consciousness becoming conscious of itself, and he got to watch it happen, got to be part of it, got to choose which side he wanted to be on. Fear or love, old or new, asleep or awake. The choice was obvious, had always been obvious. He'd just been too guilty to see it, but now he saw it clearly. The judgment was happening. The world was shifting. The old was dying so the new could be born. And Thomas Greer was choosing life. Thomas gasped, like surfacing from deep water, like breathing for the first time. He was back in his body, fully back. The visions faded. The planet view dissolved. The cosmic perspective collapsed into the simple reality of a man standing in a Tennessee clearing on a rainy October night. But everything felt different, lighter, like someone removed weights he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. His shoulders didn't hunch, his chest didn't cave, his spine held him upright without effort. He felt light, actually light, like gravity had lessened, like his bones had hollowed out and filled with something that weighed nothing at all. The bottle of whiskey waiting back at the cabin, the one he'd been nursing for 3 days, the one that usually called to him every night around this time with promises of numbness and temporary peace. It didn't call now, didn't whisper, didn't pull. Instead, the night breeze touched his face, cool, clean, carrying the scent of wet pine and earth and something that smelled like new beginnings, even though he didn't know what that smell was supposed to be. Thomas dropped to his knees, not from weakness, from overwhelming, from too much feeling happening at once, from gratitude so intense it needed expression, and kneeling was the only language his body could find. The mud soaked through his jeans, cold, wet, real. He pressed his palms into it, felt the earth solid beneath him, felt connected to something, part of something, held by something bigger than his guilt. Tears came, hot, fast, pouring down his face like they'd been waiting years for permission. But these weren't guilt tears, weren't shame tears, weren't the heavy tears that usually came with whiskey and midnight and memories he couldn't escape. These were gratitude tears, relief tears, the kind that come when you finally put down something heavy you've been carrying too long. The being's voice echoed in his mind, soft, clear, like it had been recorded directly into his memory. To forgive yourself is to accept God within yourself. Thomas understood now, really understood. Forgiveness wasn't something external, wasn't something you begged for from the sky and hoped arrived someday. It was internal, a choice, a decision to stop punishing yourself, to stop being your own worst enemy, to finally accept that you're human, and humans make mistakes, and mistakes don't have to be life sentences. Each tear that felt like washing, like baptism happening without church or ceremony, like his own body knew how to cleanse itself if he just got out of the way and let it. Years of darkness, years of self-hatred, years of believing he was irredeemable, all of it flowing out through salt water and landing in Tennessee mud where it belonged. The fear that had lived in his chest since childhood, the bone-deep certainty that he was bad, that he'd always been bad. That badness was his nature, and he'd just been fooling people until that night in the alley when his true self finally showed. It dissolved, actually dissolved, like ice in warm water, like fog in morning sun, like it had never been real in the first place. Just a story he told himself, just a belief he chose to carry, and he could choose differently now. Could choose to believe something else, something truer, something that didn't require him to hate himself to prove he was sorry. The fear transformed, shifted, became something softer, something that felt like tenderness, for himself, for the young cop who made a terrible mistake, for the broken man who tried to punish himself into redemption, for all the versions of Thomas Greer who did their best even when their best wasn't good enough. Tenderness, that was the word. Gentleness toward his own humanity, compassion for his own suffering, The kind of kindness he'd show anyone else but never thought to show himself. The kid's face appeared in his mind again, but different this time. Not frozen in death, not locked in terror. Smiling, actually smiling, like he'd looked in photos his mother showed at the trial. Young, alive, full of possibility. And Thomas felt something shift in how he held that image. Not accusation, not evidence of his damnation, not proof he was beyond saving. Blessing. That's what it felt like the kid's memory was giving him permission to live, to heal, to become something better because of what happened instead of being destroyed by it. Death never separates, the being's voice whispered. It only changes the frequency of communion. Thomas understood. The kid wasn't gone. Not really. Just existing differently, on a different level, in a different form. Still connected, still part of the same field. Still touchable through love even if not through physical presence. And maybe that connection worked both ways. Maybe the kid could feel Thomas's remorse, his change, his healing. Maybe forgiveness was happening on both sides of the veil between life and death. Thomas looked up, through the rain, through the trees, toward his cabin barely visible in the distance. A light was on, in the window, the one by his reading chair, but he hadn't left any lights on. He never did. Couldn't afford to waste electricity. Always turned everything off before he left. Yet there it was, glowing warm, yellow, welcoming, like someone turned it on while he was gone, like someone was waiting for him to come home. The being didn't speak, didn't need to. Thomas knew what the light meant, knew it was symbol, knew it was confirmation, knew it was the universe saying yes. You're ready, you're clean, you're forgiven. Come home to yourself. The judgment had finished. Not with condemnation, not with punishment, not with hellfire or damnation or any of the things he'd been taught to fear. With love, just love. Simple, pure, unconditional. The kind that sees everything and accepts everything and holds everything without needing it to be different. He'd been absolved, not by God's decree from some distant throne, by love's presence in his own heart, by his own willingness to finally stop fighting and surrender to grace that had been waiting there the whole time. Thomas stayed on his knees. Let the tears finish. Let the washing complete. Let the healing reach all the places that needed reaching. When he finally stood, his legs were steady. His breathing was calm. His heart was light, actually light, like it had finally put down the stone it had been carrying and remembered what it felt like to beat without burden. The clearing still glowed faintly with residual golden light. The being still stood nearby. The sphere still floated, but Thomas knew it was ending, knew the visitation was complete, knew the message had been delivered and received. He'd been given a gift, been shown truth, been healed in ways he didn't know were possible. And now it was time to live it, to become it, to let the healing transform into living proof that judgment isn't the end, it's the beginning. The being took a step backward, then another. The golden sphere began to dim, not suddenly, gradually, like a sunset taking its time. Thomas opened his mouth, wanted to say thank you, wanted to say something, anything, words that could somehow capture what had just happened, what had just changed, but nothing came out. His throat worked, his lips moved, but sound refused to form, like language itself wasn't adequate for this moment. Like some experiences exist beyond words, and this was one of them. The being smiled, understanding, accepting, not needing gratitude spoken out loud. The voice came one final time, gentle, clear, absolute. You already know everything, now live what you've seen. Thomas felt those words sink deep, deeper than thought, deeper than memory, into the place where knowing lives, where truth becomes part of you instead of just information you carry. The lesson wasn't about fear, never had been. Fear was just the doorway, the thing that got him to finally pay attention, to finally stop, to finally look. The real lesson was about presence, about being here, now, fully, without running, without hiding, without drowning in past or future, just being, present, aware, alive. The wind returned. He felt it on his face, in his hair. The sound of rain grew louder, individual drops hitting leaves, hitting earth, hitting him, each one distinct, each one real. The smell of the forest intensified, wet pine, rich earth, decaying leaves becoming soil. The cycle of life and death and rebirth happening everywhere all at once. His senses were sharper now, clearer, like someone cleaned a lens he'd been seeing through, like perception itself had upgraded. The golden light faded further, the sphere becoming translucent, the being's blue skin dimming, the white fire eyes cooling to something softer. The clearing was returning to normal, or Thomas was returning to normal perception. Hard to tell which. Maybe both. Maybe they were the same thing. The walls of light that had transformed the forest dissolved. Trees became just trees again. Sky became just sky. Earth became just earth. But somehow, none of it was less miraculous. Somehow, ordinary had become extraordinary simply by being seen clearly. The being was almost gone now. More suggestion than solid form. More memory than physical presence. Fading like mist in morning sun. Thomas stood still, watching, witnessing, not trying to hold on, not trying to make it last longer, just accepting, letting it end the way it needed to end. The last of the golden light flickered, pulsed once, twice, then dissolved completely. The being vanished, not with flash or sound, just ceased being visible, like it had stepped through a door Thomas couldn't see, back to wherever it came from, back to whatever dimension it called home. Silence filled the clearing, complete silence. No hum, no harmony, no telepathic voice. Just the ordinary sounds of a Tennessee forest at night in autumn. Rain, wind, distant thunder rolling away, dogs no longer howling, crickets starting their song again. Normal, completely normal, except Thomas wasn't normal anymore, would never be normal again. He turned toward the cabin, toward that light still glowing in the window, toward home, toward whatever came next. His legs moved easily, no stumbling, no heaviness, just walking, one foot in front of the other. The mud sucked at his boots, but he didn't mind. Felt grounding, felt real. The pocket watch pulsed against his chest, steady, rhythmic, alive. Time reconciled, time flowing correctly, time finally his friend instead of his enemy. He reached the edge of the forest, stepped from trees into the clearing around his cabin. The grass was wet, the path was mud, everything exactly as it had always been. But he saw it differently now, saw the beauty in the decay, saw the life in the darkness, saw that nothing was separate, everything connected, everything part of the same infinite consciousness expressing itself in form. No sky had opened, no angels had descended, no heavenly trumpets had announced the judgment, but the universe had revealed itself anyway, not out there, in here, inside his own expanding awareness, inside his own awakening heart. He climbed the porch steps, each one creaking the way it always creaked, familiar, known, home. The door opened with the same sticky resistance it always had. The hinges squeaked the same squeak. Nothing had changed. Everything had changed. Inside, the cabin was exactly as he'd left it. Chair, table, lamp, whiskey bottle still sitting there, half empty or half full depending on how you looked at it. But Thomas didn't reach for it, didn't need it. The thing it used to provide, numbness, distance, temporary escape. He didn't want those anymore, didn't need those anymore. He wanted to feel, wanted to be present, wanted to stay awake instead of drinking himself into oblivion. The lamp by the reading chair glowed warm. He walked to it, placed his hand near the bulb, felt the heat, real, physical, explicable by electricity and physics and ordinary science, but also something more. Symbol, message, confirmation. The light left on, the welcome home, the yes from the universe. Thomas sat in his chair, felt the familiar creak, the worn leather, the exact shape his body had molded over 3 years. But sitting in it now felt different, felt like sitting in his own life instead of hiding from it, felt like finally being home in his own skin. The silence surrounded him, but it wasn't empty silence, wasn't the crushing quiet that usually made him reach for whiskey and memories and guilt. This was full silence, rich silence, the kind that holds everything without needing to say anything, the kind that feels like grace made audible, or maybe inaudible. Maybe grace was always silence, the quiet certainty that everything was okay even when nothing felt okay. Thomas closed his eyes, breathed deep, felt his chest rise and fall, felt his heart beat steady and strong, felt alive, actually alive. For the first time in 3 years, the judgment had come, not the way he expected, not with fire and brimstone, not with condemnation and hell, with truth, with light, with love that saw everything and held everything and healed everything it touched. And Thomas Greer, broken, failed, guilty, human, had been transformed, not into something perfect, into something real, something awake, something ready to finally start living instead of just existing. The silence hummed. If silence could hum, if grace could sing, this was its song. The days that followed moved differently, slower, clearer, like time had texture now. Weight, presence. Thomas woke with the sun, not from habit, from desire. Something in him wanted to see the light arrive, wanted to witness the daily resurrection of color and warmth, wanted to be present for the moment darkness became day. He'd sit on the porch with coffee, just coffee, no whiskey anymore. Didn't need it, didn't want it. The bottle still sat on the shelf, but it might as well have been decorative, something from another life, another version of himself that didn't exist anymore. The calm that settled over him wasn't numbness. It was luminous. That's the only word that fit. Like peace had light in it, like serenity glowed from the inside out. He felt it in his chest, warm, steady, constant, not overwhelming, just present, like a candle that never went out, like a pilot light keeping something essential running. The second morning after the encounter, Thomas went to the shed, found old gardening tools he'd forgotten he owned, a rusty spade, a hand trowel, seeds from 2 years ago that might still be viable. The yard had been nothing but weeds and mud for 3 years. He'd let it go, hadn't cared, hadn't seen the point of growing things when he felt dead inside. But now he wanted to see things bloom, wanted to participate in life instead of just watching it pass, wanted to put his hands in earth and help something beautiful exist. He cleared the weeds, turned the soil, planted wildflower seeds, marigolds, black-eyed Susans, purple coneflowers. Nothing fancy, just color, just life, just proof that things could grow in places that had been barren. The physical work felt good, muscles engaging, sweat forming, body doing what bodies were designed to do, create, build, tend, nurture. When he finished, his hands were dirty and his back ached, and he felt more alive than he had in years. That night he found an old notebook, one he'd bought 3 years ago thinking he might journal, might process his guilt through writing, but he'd never been able to start. The blank pages had seemed like accusation, like they were waiting for confession he wasn't ready to give. Now he opened it, picked up a pen, and wrote one sentence. Judgment is the awakening of love. That's all. Just that. Simple, true, the distilled essence of everything he'd learned, everything he'd experienced, everything that had changed him. He stared at the words. They looked different than he expected, not profound, not poetic, just real. Like truth didn't need decoration, like the simplest statements carried the most weight. Each morning after that, Thomas woke and said thank you, not to anyone specific, not to God as distant father figure, just thank you. To existence, to consciousness, to whatever force held everything together and allowed him to still be here, still breathing, still getting chances to be better. He didn't ask for anything, didn't petition, didn't bargain, just gratitude, pure, simple, sufficient. The Hendersons came by the 4th day, checking on him. They did that sometimes. Good neighbors who worried about the hermit on the hill. Usually Thomas gave short answers, thanked them for their concern, sent them away quickly, didn't want company, didn't want questions, didn't want to pretend he was okay when he wasn't. But this time he invited them in, made coffee, asked about their kids, actually listened to the answers, looked them in the eyes and saw them as humans instead of intrusions. Martha Henderson noticed immediately. "You look different," she said, not suspicious, curious. "Something change?" Thomas smiled, actually smiled. "Yeah," he said. Something changed. He didn't explain, didn't try to describe the being or the light or the judgment that wasn't judgment, didn't preach or testify or attempt to convert, just smiled, just was present, just let them feel the difference instead of hearing about it. They left an hour later looking confused but happy, like they'd encountered something good but couldn't quite name what. That became the pattern. People noticed, started stopping by more often, started asking questions not with words but with looks, with curiosity, with wonder at what had shifted in the quiet man on the hill. Thomas never preached, never lectured, never tried to convince anyone of anything. He just lived, tended his flowers, wrote in his notebook, greeted people with genuine warmth, let his life be the sermon instead of his words. The fear of hell that had haunted him for 3 years, that certainty of damnation, that bone-deep conviction that he was bound for eternal punishment, gone, completely gone, not suppressed, not denied, just absent, like it had been a fever that finally broke, like he'd been sick with it and now he was well, because he'd found heaven, not up there, in here. The internal peace that didn't depend on circumstances, the quiet joy that existed regardless of what happened externally, the sense of being held by something vast and loving and unshakable. That was heaven, had always been heaven. He'd just been looking in the wrong direction. Forgiveness became his daily practice. Not complicated, not ritualistic, just simple acknowledgement. I forgive myself. I forgive the kid. I forgive everyone involved. I forgive the universe for being the way it is. Over and over, morning and night, until forgiveness wasn't something he did. It was something he was, a state of being instead of an action performed. People started asking him things, showing up with problems, with pain, with questions about life and death and meaning. Thomas didn't have answers. Not really, but he listened, really listened, and somehow that was enough. Somehow his presence, calm, accepting, non-judgmental, helped people more than advice ever could. He was teaching, but not with words, with being, with the way he moved through the world, with the peace that radiated from him like heat from a fire. And the watch, the old pocket watch that had stopped 3 years ago and restarted that night in the clearing, it never stopped again, kept perfect time, ticked steadily, pulsed reliably, like time itself had made peace with Thomas, like past and present and future had decided to cooperate instead of war with each other. He carried it everywhere, checked it often, not because he needed to know the time, because he needed to remember that time could heal, could move, could carry you forward instead of holding you back. Time and spirit, clock and consciousness, external and internal. They walked together now, synchronized, aligned, moving in harmony instead of opposition. Thomas was different. Fundamentally different, not fixed, not perfect, not without scars or memory or occasional sadness, but awake, finally awake, living instead of hiding, present instead of absent, choosing love when everything in his old programming said, choose fear. The new faith wasn't religion, wasn't dogma, wasn't rules written in ancient books and enforced by guilt. It was simple: be present, be kind, be honest, let love guide, let forgiveness flow. Let light shine without forcing it on anyone. That was enough. That was everything. That was the only sermon worth preaching. And Thomas preached it every day by simply being himself. Changed. Healed. Awake. Alive. 3 weeks after the encounter, Thomas woke before sunrise. Not unusual anymore. But this morning felt different. Felt called. Like something wanted him in the forest. In the clearing. Where everything had changed. He dressed quietly, made coffee, poured it in a thermos, walked into the pre-dawn darkness with only a flashlight and the certain feeling that he needed to return. The path was familiar now. His feet knew it, even in darkness, even without thinking. Body memory guiding him back to the place where death became life, where judgment became love, where everything false burned away and only truth remained. The forest was silent, not dead silent, living silence. The kind that holds breath before something important happens, before day breaks, before birds sing, before the world remembers it's awake. Thomas reached the clearing, the same one, the exact spot where the light had landed, where the being had stood, where his life had split into before and after. No scorch marks, no evidence, no physical proof that anything extraordinary had happened here, just grass and mud and trees and ordinary Tennessee forest. But Thomas felt it. The presence, not the being exactly, something else, something that lingered, some residual energy, some echo of what had occurred. Like the clearing itself remembered, he stood in the center, where the golden sphere had hovered, where the light had been brightest, where his old self had died and his new self had been born. "Thank you," he whispered, looking up through the canopy, through the leaves, toward the sky still dark but beginning to lighten, toward wherever the being had come from, toward whatever consciousness had chosen to visit him that stormy night. Just thank you. Simple, sincere, carrying everything he felt but couldn't fully express. The clouds above began to shift, not dramatically, gradually, natural, the way clouds always move. But Thomas watched one break apart, watched light start to filter through. Not sunrise yet, pre-sunrise. The first suggestion that day was coming. A single beam touched the clearing, golden, warm, landing exactly where Thomas stood, like spotlight, like acknowledgement, like the universe saying, "I hear you. You're welcome. Keep going." He smiled, felt tears start but didn't fight them. Let them come, let them fall. Gratitude tears, recognition tears, the kind that say something meaningful is happening and you're awake enough to notice. And in that moment, in that stillness, in that light beginning to break, Thomas understood something new, something final, something that completed the teaching. The final judgment wasn't punishment, wasn't separation, wasn't God sorting souls into saved and damned, wasn't any of the things religion taught him to fear. It was love, final love, ultimate love. Love that saw everything completely and held it anyway. Love that didn't require perfection before offering acceptance. Love that was already there, always had been there, just waiting for recognition, waiting for permission to be received. No throne, no courtroom, no angry deity demanding satisfaction, no scales weighing sins against virtues, no fire, no torture, no eternal separation, just revelation, just seeing clearly, just consciousness expanding to include everything that was real and releasing everything that was false, just healing offered, just wholeness available, just love patiently waiting for love to be chosen. God never condemned me, Thomas thought, the words forming clear and certain. I forgot about love, that's all. I just forgot. Forgot that love was the ground of everything, the source, the substance, the operating system running reality. Forgot that mistakes didn't exile you from love. They invited you deeper into it, into understanding, into compassion, into the recognition that everyone is broken and everyone is healing and everyone is doing their best, even when their best creates harm. The trees around the clearing swayed. No wind, or maybe wind so subtle only they could feel it, but they moved, branches nodding, leaves rustling, like confirmation, like the forest itself was saying, yes, you got it. You understand now. You see what we see. Thomas closed his eyes, felt the light on his face even through closed lids, felt warmth, felt presence, felt peace, absolute peace, the kind that doesn't need anything to be different, the kind that accepts everything exactly as it is, the real judgment, the true judgment, the only judgment that mattered. It wasn't God deciding your fate. It was you recognizing who you'd always been, divine consciousness having human experience, love learning what it's like to forget itself and then remember, soul journeying through darkness so light would mean something when it finally arrived. Reconciliation, that's what judgment was. The soul reconciling with divine light. The human remembering it was always spiritual. The lost one realizing it was never actually lost, just temporarily confused, just briefly disoriented, just walking in circles until finally, it looked up and saw where it had been the whole time. Home, always home, never not home, just sometimes forgetting what home felt like. Thomas opened his eyes. The clearing was brighter now. Sun rising for real. Day beginning. New day. New chance. New moment to choose love over fear. Presence over absence. Truth over comfortable lies. He took a deep breath. Held it. Released it slowly. Felt his body relax completely. Felt surrender. Not defeat surrender. Peace surrender. The kind where you stop fighting and start flowing. Stop resisting and start accepting. Stop demanding it be different and start working with what is. The judgment was complete, had always been complete, was never actually pending, just waiting for Thomas to stop judging himself so love could finally reach him. And now it had. Now he was held. Now he was home. Now everything that had been broken was being remade into something that made the breaking worthwhile. Thomas turned, walked out of the clearing, back toward his cabin, back toward his life, back toward whatever came next. But he wasn't the same man who'd walked this path 3 weeks ago. Wasn't even close. That man had died. This man, this version, this Thomas, he was new, reborn, awake, and the judgment that had terrified him his entire life. It had come. It had happened. It had transformed him completely. Not with punishment, with love. Only love. Always love. Forever love. Love that didn't end. Love that didn't condemn. Love that simply was. Eternal. Infinite. Unconditional. Real. The truest thing in the universe. And Thomas Greer finally believed it.